Alrighty, I guess we slowly get started with today's presentation and today's masterclass. Welcome everyone. My name is Jan Bouwens, Managing Director within the Foundation for Auditing Research. It's great that you can make it this afternoon to join us on a great presentation that Anna Gold from the Vrije Universiteit of Amsterdam and Andrew Trotman from Northeastern University is going to treat us with, I would say, on improving quality of group audits. And we are specifically going to look at component audits. I'm not going to make this a long story because this is not for me. It's this is all about Andrew and Anna talking about auditing. So I just want to share with you, the population that we are looking. We have 54 participants today, which is a great achievement, and we have about a 50-50 cutout of people from academia as well as from practice. So that's really great that we have this. This is exactly what we want as foundation, is that we inform both practitioners as well as academics, and this is really great that we have this this way. So the authors of are Anna Gold and Andrew Trotman, and Anna Gold. Of course we know her all of much stuff into behavior research experiments that she has been doing in auditing and informing the society. Andrew is looking into the effect of audit standards and audit committees in decision making, and I think that's also where they meet, Andrew and Anna, and they both publish in the best journals that we have. I'm very proud that we can present them to you today. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to Andrew and Anna. And please, you tell us, what are the rules as to how people should behave and the like, so that you are in charge. And all the best. I'm very much looking forward to your presentation of today.
Thank you so much, Jan, for that nice introduction. And let me see if I can share my screen with you guys. Yeah, here we go. I think, well, no, not really. Sometimes. Yes, here we go. All right. So thank you, Jan, so much for inviting Andrew and myself today for giving this masterclass, and welcome everyone to today's masterclass, which is already, I don't know, you didn't mention, Jan, but I think already the 7th, 8th, 10th, 9th, I don't know. I gave one before and I enjoyed it, or two actually, and I enjoyed it very much. One was like this one online, the other was actually in person, which is of course always nice, and it would have been great if we could have done that today as well. That didn't work. Hopefully we'll get back to seeing each other in person again soon, but for the time being, we'll do the best we can with an online setting. So Jan, you already gave us a great introduction, so I'm not going to say that much more about ourselves. Today, we would like to share some insights with you from a survey that we did with the help of the Foundation for Auditing Research and auditing firms in the Netherlands, where we looked at, where we asked auditors to participate that have experience in their role of the component auditor during group audits. So that's really our focus. And just let me give you a very brief introduction to what are group audits. I assume most of you are aware, but just to make sure we're on the same page. So a group audit basically refers to the audit of financial statements of a corporation that's comprised of more than one segment or components. And those components would typically, at least that's what we're interested in, be located in various parts of the world. So it's the group auditor that provides assurance over the consolidated financial statements, and the group auditor would normally be located in the same jurisdiction as the client's headquarters. And ultimately, the group auditor is also liable for the work that has been performed. However, since you have segments located in other parts of the world, the group auditor will engage component auditors in those parts, in those countries or regions where they will perform the audit work of the local operations of those segments. And now what auditing standards prescribe is that the group auditor should be highly involved in those audits of the components. So they should be directing, they should be supervising, and they also should be reviewing the work that the component auditor does, which obviously makes sense because the group auditor is also ultimately responsible for that audit. However, there's by now quite some evidence, both from inspection reports and also from research, that this level of involvement by the group auditor is not always at the level that it should be. So today, I will first talk a little bit about some of the key regulator findings in this area and also concerns when it comes to group audits. I will also provide a very, very brief overview of prior literature in the area, not going into too much depth, but just to show you what we already know. And then I plan to give the floor to Andrew, who will present the findings of our survey that we did from the perspective of the component audit leaders and their experiences with group audits. And we've sprinkled the session with a few polls, I think 5 in total. And of course, we also welcome you to ask questions in the chat, which we will monitor closely. I'm saying that even though at the moment I don't see anything of the chat, so hopefully Andrew has a view to that. Once Andrew takes over, I will be in charge of monitoring the chat. So to get back to those polls, let's start out with a very easy one. And I just saw Jan already showed you who registered for today's session. Well, maybe I could invite you to go to menti.com and use the code indicated here on the screen and just let us know who you are, and that will hopefully kind of support the graph that Jan just showed us. It would just be nice to see, well, who actually made it today into this masterclass. So we have the first responses popping up, and this is a little exciting for me because it's the first time I'm integrating Menti into a PowerPoint slide, but it seems to be working. So we have academics in the room, audit practitioners, standard setter, someone who has a different role. So I guess we have fewer participants than registered, but the distribution seems quite similar to what we just saw on Jan's slide, so that's good news. All right, thank you. Then I'll move on to a little more introduction on the topic. So the starting point for our study is, as I said already, that there are recurring concerns about the quality of audit, especially when it comes to global group audits. So the IFIR, which is the International Forum of Independent Audit Regulators, and has about, I think I read 57 member countries. So it's kind of a conglomerate of all the national audit oversight boards from the various countries. And the IFIR holds an annual survey among its members from all these jurisdictions, which provides data and outcomes from those member countries' inspection reports. So kind of to get a global view of, well, what are key problems, not only in global group audits, by the way, but one section in the report talks about that. And so what I'm showing you here on this slide is the findings of audit deficiencies related to group audits. This is showing them at the engagement level, and importantly for audits of listed public interest entities, So, for example, to the very left here of the slide, that's the latest survey that's online. There were 444 engagements represented in the survey results that actually had, where the inspections had a focus on this theme of group audits. And in 29 of these 444 engagements, so 7%, of the inspected engagements, the respective regulator indeed found deficiencies related to group audits, which I guess is considered a substantial number of findings, even though what you also see here on this slide is that that proportion has actually decreased somewhat over the years. So if we look at the early years, we had 11, even 13% of findings related to group audits. So it just shows you a little bit that this is an issue that is also explicitly being discussed in this report that comes out annually by the IFIAR. Now, before I go on and talk more about summary findings of this IFIAR report when it comes to these group audit deficiencies, I would now like to invite you to answer our second poll, where I invite you to list what you believe are the main challenges that auditors face in the conduct of a group audit. And you can think about anything that comes to your mind, and it might be, for the practitioners among you, might be something that is based on your own experience maybe, or it might just be based on things you've read or your own thoughts if you think logically about this phenomenon of group auditors working remotely with component auditors. So let's see if this works, and if it does, that should give us a nice word cloud in a moment. So you can enter up to 3 terms here, but you can also just enter 1. And if the technology is with us today, this will result in a word cloud that reflects your thoughts on what are the major group audit challenges.
While
So
we do that, it looks like someone has their hand up. I think it's Jean.
Okay, go ahead, Jan.
I will put it down. I will ask after this. That seems to be more appropriate.
Oh, okay,
So
that's fine
I
too.
will unraise my hand.
All right. Yeah, we have quite some interaction here. So find right quality, auditor, language barrier, coordination, corruption, review, communication, documentation, providing direction, nationalistic pride, sufficiency of evidence, communication coming up a few times, cultural context, we'll talk about that as well later on. Local regulations, indeed, might be different. Scoping. Great, okay, this is working quite nicely. So a lot of the terms I see here, we will actually be getting back to throughout our presentation at one point or the other. So it seems like we're on the same page. So thank you very much. And I'll move on now to what I promised to talk a little more about. Here we go. That latest IFIAR report that actually didn't only report on numbers of findings in those member countries, but also try to identify, well, what are the 4 key problems in group audits? And so the first one here is that they find that the group auditor seems to do an insufficient job at considering the work that was done by the component auditor and also in reviewing that work. And I didn't put that up here, but this is where the IFIAR notes the most findings by far compared to the other 3 points. The next point is the failure to provide a clear plan. So the group auditor not providing a clear audit plan to the component auditor, followed by the failure to appropriately calculate materiality for the group, as well as the different component audits. So there's some problems observed there in those inspections. And then finally, there's an overall failure observed to respond appropriately to the findings that were done by the component auditor. And basically regulators and standard setters, so for example, the IAASB and the PCAOB agree that work needs to be done to address all of these problems. So there's debates going on various regulatory intervention, changes in the standards, and providing additional guidance to audit firms. So this is definitely a topic that is quite hot at the moment. Let me also give you, as I said already.
Can I now ask my question? Sorry.
Of course. I'm sorry, Jan.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, it's fine. And this is really maybe a dilettante type of question, but what is actually the difference in the issue between compiling a team, and that team has sub-teams when it is a big firm, right? Compiling a team to do actually an audit versus that you are looking at the component audit. So what is the big main difference between these two?
Yeah. Oh, Andrew, what did you want to?
Well, I'm happy for you to answer too. I think, Jan, that comes out in our very first phase that we talk about of staffing the audit. And it comes back to lack of communication, lack of timely communication from the group auditor, explaining to the component auditor that this is actually happening, this is the scope, and this is what you need to do, and this is when you need to do it by.
But they need to also do that when they are talking to their own team. So to me, then, if that is a problem, the same problem should surface in their own team.
Absolutely, but I think within a firm, say it's let's just pick one of the firms in the Netherlands, they really do understand. They have a very good structure from early on for the year when they're going to do which audit and when that's occurring, set it up and be able to align their staff members to that. Whereas opposed to the group audit, this is coming from, and we'll get into this, from different countries. These, it might be it's in like the same firm but from a different country. They're not getting that early notification at the start of the year, or for planning periods for the year. And sometimes it's coming up very close to the time, and they say you've got about a month to do this, and all the staff are on different engagements. They might be on, we've got this pops up, they're on vacation, and so the staff turnover is very high. So that was one of our big findings that we noticed, is it's a lack of timely communication about this component audit, when this needs to occur and the scope of it, and that changes very regularly over the years. So they've had trouble doing that.
I guess the reason for me asking this is, I mean, I don't want to take too much of it, but the reason for me asking this is that, could it also be the case that just firms, for instance, that are located in another country pose a risk anyhow, and maybe that risk is just not really appreciated to the extent that it should be appreciated at all, and that is actually the main what explains why this can go wrong, or that it affects the quality, at least, of the audit.
Do you mean the segment being located in a different country?
Yes.
Yeah. Partly that is probably an issue. Of course, that adds to the complexity of the audit, right? So I'm sure that's a big underlying issue. But then adding to that, of course, because you started your question asking, well, what's the difference to regular, one country? And I guess the big difference is that it's not one team, right? It's not like it would be for a regular audit, but it's actually a team in, at the group audit location, and it's a different team that at the component client location. So that already makes things, in combination, I'm sure, with client-related variables, adds to the complexity.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So again, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but let us just briefly look a little bit at what we already know from the audit literature. And I'm by no means comprehensive here, but we listed some of the key findings here. So first of all, there's an archival research stream that finds that overall audit quality indeed suffers when the audit work is outsourced to component auditors. And we just talked a little bit about some of the reasons for that. And again, surely that has to do with the greater complexity of an engagement that is looking at different component conglomerates like that. The second research stream, there's one paper in there by Downey and Bedard from 2019 where they surveyed group audit leaders. So it's a little bit similar to what we are doing here, but they did it from a group audit leader perspective and examined the challenges that they were encountering during group audits, and those were within network group audits, just like we are looking at here as well, in terms of coordination and communication with the component auditor. And they find that the challenges that they experience are particularly prominent for greater number of components. So again, tapping into what we just talked about, and also when the component auditor is more involved in the audit. And they also go beyond that to look at, well, how could this problem be solved? And they find that something they call tacit coordination strategies. So really getting to know the component auditor and I guess developing more stringent ties between the two entities helps alleviate some of the challenges. Now, the other study here, Burke et al. Support these findings, but then with archival data where they find that audit quality indeed suffers when the amount of work by the component auditor increases. And then finally, I just want to briefly talk about a qualitative study by Downey and Westerman from 2021, which generally finds that group auditors are dissatisfied with the work performed by component auditors, and they find that in different areas of the audit. So what's our contribution beyond what is known here? So in our project, I already alluded to that, we are interested in the perspective of the component auditor, which, as far as we know, prior research so far has largely overlooked. So while it may be easy for the group auditor to blame the component auditors, that might not tell us the full story. So it could be that the group auditor is not always delivering the work that they are supposed to. It might not only be a problem on the component side of things. Also, we hope to provide some additional insights into why component audit work may be considered to be insufficient by those group auditors. So to summarize that, our research objective in this study is to identify underlying root causes for these lower quality group audits, but also drivers of higher audit quality. And we do this, as I said already, through the perspective of component auditors themselves, and we focus on group auditor involvement and communication between group auditors and component auditors during 4 phases of the audit, so staffing, planning, field work, and review. The method we use in this study is called an experiential questionnaire. I think I said this already, but the persons that we invited to participate in this survey were component audit leaders, so managers, senior managers, and partners. And so what we asked the firms to provide us with through, of course, Center Data, which is the intermediary when it comes to distributing this survey, were component audit leaders that were active on global group audits in the Netherlands, where the group auditor would not be based in the Netherlands, but either in the UK or Germany, thereby limiting down the variance a little bit. So basically, they were the component audit leaders, and we asked them about a specific experience they'd had with a group auditor based in either the UK or Germany. Now, let me say a few more words about what it means to do an experiential questionnaire. So here we asked respondents to recall and describe a completed component audit. So actually think back the last 1 or 2 years, what kind of component audit did they experience? And we did this in collaboration with participating firms to make sure that we identified engagements that were not too far back, so they would be able to recall some of the details. Then we asked them basically some both closed and open questions. Today we'll focus mainly on the open-ended questions, the qualitative data, but we also asked some closed questions. So we asked them to describe the engagement, client characteristics. Then we asked them also quantitatively to provide their perceptions of the overall efficiency, quality, comfort with audit outcomes. And then per phase, so staffing, planning, fieldwork, and review, we asked them, and that's where the open-ended questions came in, what went well in this phase, but also what did you experience as being very challenging or difficult? And then per phase, we also asked them how effective did you experience that this phase was. And then we, of course, also asked about the involvement of the group auditor in those phases and how the coordination and communication went. So before I now hand over to Andrew, I would like you to have a look at this poll question where we want to see, prior to seeing our findings that Andrew will present, which phase do you at this point expect creates the greatest challenges to component auditors if you would have to choose from these 4 stages or phases in the audit? So we have someone, 2 saying, 1 saying staffing, planning, review. Okay, so I guess staffing, planning, review is where you would expect the greatest challenges, and then at this point planning the most, although we have a small group responding here, but oh, and here we have someone also saying, well, fieldwork is where I would expect the greatest challenges. We'll revisit a similar question after we've discussed our results. So thank you for now, and that brings me to the results. Let's see if I can turn off my screen sharing, and then I'll hand over to Andrew.
Mine's good now. You can see that, Anna, the results?
Yes.
Yep. All right. So thank you. Yeah, thank you, Anna, for passing that over. So I'll be going through the results through the 4 phases that Anna talked about, and then we'll have another poll. Like Jan came up before, if anyone has a question, wants to interrupt, I'm more than happy for that to happen. So yeah, raise your hand or just call out to me. So if we look at our respondents and from the engagements that we had a very good response of 86 people. The majority of those were partners, but it was a good mix along the senior managers and other managers. So all of these people have experienced that component audit engagement within the last 1 to 2 years. As Anna mentioned before, the component auditor was based in the Netherlands, but we had our group auditor. We selected 2 countries for the group auditor to be from. One was the UK, the other one was Germany, and we had about 2/3 from the UK, and the other third from Germany was roughly there. All of these audits were basically full scope audits, but the majority of the components were private entities, which we often expect with these with component auditing. So there was a very small amount that were public in the component. A large mix of industries, and we have 3 listed there. Manufacturing was the greatest, with retail and technology also high. And one thing we do note is On this, 30% of the group auditors perform some type of site visit at some stage during the audit. And we want to keep this in mind later when we see the findings, particularly some of the positive experiences shared with us by these component auditors. So if I share with you the staffing here, quantitative results of staffing, what we observe is that when the component auditor perceives group auditor involvement in staffing, it can be associated with audit efficiency and audit effectiveness. And we'll see this coming with our qualitative results that in a moment. This is generally associated when the group auditor is involved and provides direction about the engagement and the overall scope of the engagement in a timely manner. And that quite matches Jan's question before, how well this goes is a component of that. We do have there an absence of staffing being staffing effectiveness, audit outcomes being related to staffing requests by the group auditor, but this is largely due to many of the group auditors do not require any type of make any requests of the people. They can provide guidance, they do provide direction and somewhat of oversight, but very little there to do with requests. So when we're looking at staffing, what we found was that overall the group auditors provide very little direction. Okay, and so then this caused challenges to the component auditor, and these were often associated with the group auditor's late and untimely group audit communications about the audits. So what happened here is many of these group component auditors said that the group auditors give such little notice about this that they experience these clashes with their other scheduling. Now, this scheduling is often due to in busy season. It's often over local or holiday or vacation periods. And this actually has an overall effect. And we have some quotes here, and I'm going to provide you some quotes when we go through. I won't read them all directly, but I'll read some to you, and you can always read those as well. But as we see from these quotes, the last two are talking about the holidays and vacation periods. So the group auditors made a late request to have the component audit conducted over a holiday period. And the first one there is talking about the busy season. So they're requesting it over the busy season. And what this does is that overall, it affects the expertise that's available for the engagement. It affects the time amount that they can actually spend on the engagement. And also it affects auditor motivation. There's a possibility there, like, if you're supposed to be on vacation, you might not be as happy to be performing a component audit for the group auditor at late notice. Another very important aspect we found here for staffing was that group auditors generally set the component audit budget or the fees. And in the majority of times, the component auditors view this as that the budgets are set too low. And this obviously affects our staffing issues there, to be able to establish a full and experienced team. And as this quote here says, the budget was determined by the group auditor. It was lower than what they expected and what they had calculated was necessary, and it was impossible for them to meet those demands. And so that was one of the major things we found with the staffing, is that the group auditor making those budgets. With staffing, overall, the component auditor suggested to us that staffing of the engagement is just purely driven by the availability of the staff at the time. And this is a little bit of a negative issue. And again, it comes back to Jan's question before, was why could this be a problem? Well, when there's the late group auditor influence of insight on when the component's going to happen, the scope of it, and what are the deadlines, they don't have the teams available. And then so it's availability of what staff are there available. And this creates a higher turnover rate of staff from year to year, and which also has less expertise over year to year. And you might not be able to get the greater senior managers or the partners that are knowledgeable in these areas to work on this, or as much as they possibly can. So this is the main driver, is just purely availability. And that's an interesting finding that, I think it's an interesting finding there. And there were many.
I think Jan has a question.
Yes, please, Jan.
Is it all right to ask you here a question? Because, I'm just trying to gauge, what is really the difference? Because, normally you write an audit engagement plan, right? And that includes also some planning and timing. and that needs to be communicated within the team. So how does it work? And do you then are they generally too late with reaching out to this component auditor? Is that the case? Is it just that they are too late, right? Are they getting too late involved? Because the team, they get to see the engagement plan, so they know what to do and when. And is it, for instance, just that they are informed too late, or is just the quality of the plan, well suited for what is happening in the team itself, but not to the component auditor. I mean, I'm just trying to get grip. Sorry.
No, you're absolutely right, and you bring up some findings that we're going to address in the planning phase as well. So you're absolutely right. The staffing, one of the big findings that we were instructed on was often this is just too late. We didn't know what was going to happen, or we didn't know what their deadlines were and the scope of this audit, whether that changes over periods. The second part is the planning part, which you mentioned, which we will be getting into. The planning is often unsuitable for the component. So it takes a lot of time, it changes, and they can't match that to those deadlines. And so as opposed to their normal regular engagements that they run where they can set those up, and obviously there's overruns and time may go over, but their staff can move around freely within those engagements. With these component audit engagements, it's like it's just thrown on at the end. So they just have to pull a staff member from here and here and see who's available, who has any overlap going on, any conflicts, and they put those together, and that just has a multiplying effect of each year there's a large amount of turnover. It's not the same seniors, it's not the same partners dealing with these components, and so then there's a lot more learning, which takes more time, and again that comes back to the budget issue. But again, sorry.
This just from a professional point of view, you would then expect this. If I was the component auditor, I would say, well, sorry, I can't do it because this is not. I cannot take responsibility for the quality.
And that's a good point, and I think that comes up a lot with the Netherlands, and it's something aside that we look at later with the high quality of focus of the Netherlands there. But I think a lot of these firms, because we're dealing with in-network firms, so it's like PwC to PwC, Deloitte to Deloitte, there isn't that opportunity where they're allowed to say, no, we can't take this.
They force it on the colleague firm in the other country, for instance.
Exactly. So it's not like they have a choice to say that. Yeah.
Interesting. Very interesting. Thanks. Sorry for the interruption.
No, I enjoy it. So we're talking about the staffing, but what we do observe in staffing is when the group auditor does provide any type of direction, they do experience some positive reactions to this, some positive experiences. But this all comes back to the timing of this communication. And here are some. So when there was early direction, highly qualified and complementary people with the complementary skills to fill this engagement were there. Another one was talking about familiar skills. So those people who have worked on the engagement before, they were familiar with the client. And the last one, they're familiar with the client and familiar with the group audit. That really helps as well. So underlying all of our staffing issues, that the challenges that we found was that really comes back to this timely group audit communication about the engagement, so that the engagement is occurring, that the scope of the engagement, what they need to do, obviously, and the deadlines of those of that engagement. However, we do find something there, and this was more of a minority view, but people did mention to us that a lack of involvement is sometimes viewed as favorable because it provides more autonomy to the component auditor. So they were able to do their own things, pick their own staff. But again, this really does come back to, as long as they know that the component audit needs to occur and when and what, by what time and the scope of it, then this works really well. So there were not a lot of people, I shouldn't say that. There were quite a few that said having that autonomy, having the lack of direction was fine with them over the staffing issues.
So now I'm moving on. Can I ask one more question on the scope? Right?
Yes.
Who is the best? Who is in the best position to actually determine what should be the scope?
Another
Is
good.
that the component auditor, or is that the group auditor?
Another good point, Jan, and you keep jumping a phase ahead on me on everything, which is
sorry,
nice.
no,
I think it's great you're thinking about. We are going to address all of your answers for this. You're right. The component auditor is the one that should really have the greater idea of scope, particularly when they have performed a statutory audit over this client. So that was something that came out a few times with us. And if they know the local industries and how that works, and obviously with local regulations and everything like that, that was an important perspective. The group auditor knows the scope on what do they require and how big these clients are and how much of the group work will feed down to the component. So there's a bit of a mix going on there on scope.
Thanks.
All right. So sorry, let's click on that. So moving on to planning, as we can see here, there is, we have, what we found was there is a lot, when we observe the group auditor involvement, there's a lot of perceived positive effects on the component auditor's effectiveness, efficiency, quality, and comfort. And that's the overall auditor's comfort on this. So in particular, we had supervision and oversight. When supervision and oversight from the group auditor occurred in the planning phase, we found all these positive perceived, and these are perceived outcomes, but perceived positive outcomes on those. Also detailed instructions, including specific requirements for that actual engagement. These were perceived as highly effective and promoted the efficiency and quality and auditor comfort within the engagement. So looking into this a little bit further, here are some positive parts of the planning from when the the component auditor receives instructions from the group auditor. So each of these really fall back to timely instructions from the group auditor. So when the group auditor has knowledge and knows about the team members, what they can do, and the comment there was it helped us do the right things the first time. And this is crucial to their planning. There was also good communication with the auditor about the deadlines and attention. They had attention for local details, local problems. And another respondent said there was timely and regular calls with the group auditor. So they were up to date and it went well because they kept each other informed, and they were able to request information so the group auditor was able to request information from the group on behalf of the component auditor, which helped with the audit. So again, it's timely instructions, high end of communication, which worked well, was classed as positive experiences. As an alternative, we have the next slide, which is about negative experiences. And most of this, again, was due to untimely communication from the group auditor. So there was planning difficulties because the instructions were late. It was late in the financial year when they heard from the group auditor, and so that creates more challenges. So as we can see, both in those planning stages, again, it really falls down to timely communication and timely instructions from the group auditor was what helped the component auditor go through. Now, under the audit plan, what we found from our respondents was the component auditors had experience of 3 different types of group auditor involvement in developing or helping instruct the audit plan. The first one is the group auditor is highly involved. And now this means this often had that there was a site visit or the group auditor was well knowledgeable about the group audit. So this one here, the first quote there, the group auditor joined the planning meeting in the Netherlands. They understood the business, the local business, or they gained that understanding. And as a result, audit instructions that were received were very specific and accurate, which helped the component do their job in an efficient and effective manner. The second one there is they worked together, keeping each other informed. And so this was quite an, this was helped with the understanding of that client there. So that was a positive. The second category is that the group auditor due to a limited knowledge of the component, that's the actual component, the client there, lets the component auditor establish the plan. Now, this is often due to, for multiple reasons, whether one, the component just doesn't, the group auditor does not know enough about the component, and that was one of the reasons, or the secondary was the group auditor had, the component, I keep getting them mixed up, I apologize. The component auditor has actually done the statutory audits. They have a lot more knowledge of the component. They've done it over multiple years. So the group auditor lets the component establish the plan. And then as you see with this comment, this results in an efficient and effective audit planning process because they were allowed to do this plan and the group auditor signs off on that and adopts those instructions. Still sends them to this, so they're still reviewing them, which is part of what their requirements, still reviewing them and sending them off, but they agreed with those. The third is where the group auditor provides the very centralized and standard audit plan, which is untailored to the client. And this is often the result when there were many components for the group, so many subcomponents there. And the component auditors who experienced this viewed this as a negative because the plan does not match or fit the needs for this component. It required many adaptations, which we're about to go through to. It required adaptations. It required unnecessary work or redundant work that they may have already done or needed to do that didn't fit the actual client itself. So one thing we did look at was the risk and materiality, risk and materiality adaptations that were needed to be made by the component auditor. What we do find is that overall the components generally comply with the specifications and instructions that the group auditor provide, particularly with risk and materiality. But there were a few times, or more than a few times, I should say, more than a few times when they needed to adapt this risk and materiality. So the first one was the adaptations were needed to be made when there was due to an inadequate group audit risk assessment. And this is often due, again, going back to the group auditor didn't understand the client, the component client very well. As you see there, materiality was set too low. It was unrealistic for the risks. That first quote talks about and the risk was not even applicable, like the company had no inventory, but that was a risk outlined by the group auditor. There's one going back to sort of the audit plan, but the instructions were more for the one component. So there were multiple subcomponents for this group that were provided with the same instructions. And again, they didn't fit, they didn't suit those. And also with a lack of knowledge, suitable risks were not identified, or those risks that were identified weren't applicable. So this would cause the major need for any adaptation to the risk or materiality issues. Risk or materiality levels. The second one we found was when the component auditor had performed a statutory audit and they had used a different level of risk or materiality in the statutory audit. And so these components decided to choose the lower risk that was used in the statutory audit in the Netherlands, as opposed to what the group auditor presented. And so that was where the modification occurred there. The last one, this was a minority, but we found that some people wrote back to us and said it is sometimes not permissible for the component audit to adapt any of the plan and must stick to the rules and the materiality and the risk ratings. So that was what we found an interesting finding. But like I said, that wasn't brought up too many times, and we don't know what firm it was. But that was just something we found there that was quite interesting. All right, moving on to fieldwork. As you can see here, fieldwork, the component auditors did not really respond that many audit outcomes were affected by the group auditor involvement in fieldwork. So that's from a sort of an overall perspective. What we did get reported was negative experiences. So from their involvement of group auditors did not contribute too much to positive experiences, but they did, lack of group auditor involvement did provide to some more negative experiences. But the specific examples of when the group audit resolved either through consistent communication or collaborative work and how this was viewed positive. So I've got some examples here. We talk about collaboration, communication, and contact. So when when we're talking about collaboration, when the group auditor helps gather information from the group management, and this one, the local management could not help. When they were responsive and agreed on the procedures to be formed, so that type of collaboration really helps and created positive experiences with the component auditor. And strong communication and contact. So as we said here, they had good, group auditor was in good contact, continuous contact with the group auditor, and that ensures greater understanding of the component, alignment of their goals, and group auditor team was available for questions and from time to time checked in with the component. And this was an important one that we found, or a regular one that we found more often, that timely responses to questions and insights and the need was great, created a lot more positive experiences and a greater outcomes, perceived outcomes, I should say, there. As opposed to this, there were some negative experiences, and this is really just, again, back to lack of understanding, lack of involvement from the group auditor. So lack of group auditor understanding. They did not understand the complexity or risks within the client, the component client. With the lack of involvement, sometimes the components expected a more directive role. With the lack of understanding and, again, lack of involvement, they were forced to perform extra work that they shouldn't have had to do based on, the plan requiring them to do those. And getting any type of information about audit procedures and reporting from the group audit engagement in a timely manner was challenging, which put challenges onto the component audit. Again, as we mentioned before, however, a lack of involvement by the group auditor can also be experienced as a positive by the component auditor. So this component auditor responded, group auditor did not have an active role in the field work, but that meant they had some more autonomy and they could pick the procedures themselves. The clients were cooperative because of it, or as part of this, and so the field work ran very smoothly. So there was a balance in here. The majority was that negative experiences found from a lack of involvement, but some component auditors seem to appreciate this lack of involvement. A question that arises from this was, it's really about communication and open communication between the group auditor and the component auditor. And one thing, and we don't have the findings for this, but it's something where, whether it's future research or insights could help with this, is really who should be driving this communication. Is it the component auditor that should be driving it and reaching out to the group auditor at any time they need it, or should the group auditor be reaching out and driving this communication with the component auditor? Okay, moving on to the review process. This was one of our very interesting findings. It has been reported from like IFIA and other regulatory agencies, but one of the major things that they looked at here was less than half of component auditors receive any type of review comments. And that doesn't mean just low level or quick review comments. That's received no review comments, and that was pretty interesting. So that's less than half of them. So and what we found overall was when the component auditors do receive review comments, they view that quite positively for many reasons. They were emphatic that it improved the audit outcomes due to it improved their effectiveness the efficiency on the audit when they needed to fix things. It improved future outcomes and overall quality over a period of time. And we can have a look at that. So here is the quantitative results we had. So we have a look at these. As we can see in this table, in particular, comfort. For the first time, comfort really came up as an audit outcome that was affected. So when the group auditor provides review comments, the auditor's comfort really improved. Okay, as you see there, effectiveness obviously was ticked off on everyone. So when the group auditor provides review comments, There's a high level of detail of those review comments, the quality of those comments, and in particular, the bottom line there is a sufficient time to provide the ability to incorporate that feedback and fix the audit file. That was perceived as affecting all of those audit outcomes of efficiency, effectiveness, quality, and comfort. Okay, and now this was matched from our qualitative results. So we did find that in our qualitative results. So having a look at this review, what we found here is a lack of review as described. Half of the people did not receive a review, and this was viewed as very negative by the leaders. So when they did receive a review, it was often limited. So those other half that did receive a review was very limited. So if you look at this first quote, the depth of the file review was limited. We are by far the most significant part of this group and generate the majority of the revenue from the group. But no questions were asked about the file, which is pretty interesting as the greatest component of the group, and there was still no review over the audit file. So that's pretty indicative of the group auditor and what's going on there. Again, another one, the group auditor was not engaged, and over several years there was never a quality review of our file or regular calls, and our only contact over the years was regarding try to increasing engagement fees. So,
Andrew, I think Jan has another question here.
Please do. Yes.
Jan, please go ahead. You have to unmute yourself.
Thanks. Yeah, it would actually be great if also people from academia and from practice would chip in here as well. So what their thoughts are, because this seems to be very key, right? So you know, to me, this begs the question, you know, what are the incentives actually of the component auditor to do a good job? But are they incentivized to do a good job? And what happens if they do not do a good job, right? And it is found out, right? When you know a check has been done over their files, right? What happens if that is then found to be insufficient or you know anything? And so what are the incentives actually to do a good job? I understand this issue of that they were informed too late. So as a consequence, that is going to affect how much work they are going to put in. But their reputation, if they do it wrong, is also at stake. So you know, it is actually it's not clear to me how these incentives really work here for these component auditors, especially also for the you know the audit leader, so the engagement leader, right? It's also puzzling to me why they would accept this, right? Why would they accept a report that contains nothing, right? That's puzzling as well. So yeah. So I ask you, Andrew, but maybe that also people in the audience actually, maybe they have the answer.
I'm willing to help respond to Jan's. I was just waiting if there was something.
Yeah.
No.
We actually have Remco is raising his hand. Remco, go ahead.
I don't know whether it's an answer to the question Jan raised, but at least it can be also a question from my side, since component auditors sometimes and I do not know whether how this is comprised in your sample. Component auditors many times do have two engagements. One is for the group audit and one is for the statutory accounts. And one incentive is that if you are the auditor for the statutory accounts, then the component work for the group is something, well, it needs to be done. It's mandatory, but it's not. There's no fun. There's no real engagement. It's your statutory account statutory audit relationship you can shine. And then the component audit needs to be wrapped up and filed in January, February, and the statutory work can be done in more elongate time, in March, May, etc. To what extent might this also be possible in your sample?
Oh, well, we definitely experienced that. So we found that there was a lot of components that had also performed the statutory audit. I found, and this might be my experience and just from reading the data, and Anna may know better than me, is that the statutory audit was often performed before the group audit. And that's where I got that information from when we were reading the adaptations to materiality and risk. A lot of the comments were, well, we've already performed this and at 5% materiality, even though the group auditor says we can use a 7% materiality. So we've done it before, so we do 5% because obviously it's lower and it would fit in. So I found that that's right. So you're right with the incentive part there, and the statutory versus a group audit. So the group audit, you just got to have to do the work and send it off. Yeah. What we found, and I agree with you, like it's just like, oh, it could be like that's bonus money. But they did have to repeat a lot of the procedures, and also what I seem to, and I'm reading into this information, I couldn't report it statistically type of thing, but what I found was that the component auditors really did feel, and this helps answer Bidion's question, really did feel like a lack of review made them unimportant. And that's that one quote that's kind of still up there on the slide, like, we're by far the biggest component and we don't even get a review file. And part of that is I don't know whether for that person we could look back at some of the other data. Did they actually perform a statutory audit or not as well? We didn't ask that direct question. Like, did you do? Or we might have, Anna.
Yeah, I think we did actually, but we didn't go much beyond that. So right. I think it's something that we could look into, whether responses vary for some of the questions depending on whether they did or did not also perform the statutory audit. But at the moment, I also forget what the proportion was. So that's definitely something we could look into. And again, we don't have the data to run any sophisticated quantitative models, but we could certainly see if that affects their qualitative responses, right?
Yeah. And one question at least, Andrew, did you state that to your understanding most component auditors did their statutory work in advance of the group work? Because that sounds very counterintuitive to my experience. Okay. In a multinational corporation listed, for example, reports and issues their annual report in January or something for listing requirements, and then afterwards the statutory accounts can be months later. That's but maybe practitioners might fill into this.
And well, I'll answer. And I mentioned before that was really just a feeling that I got from reading that information. So there was I don't have any definitive on that. And maybe they're talking about, or it read to me like, yes, they did the statutory audit before the component, but maybe they're talking about they did the statutory audit the previous year before the component the next year, and then they're just sticking.
Yeah, that was going to be my response to that. That's probably what they mean, but we could look into that more. I think Ado has a question or maybe a contribution to this issue. Ado, go ahead. Oh, you have to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you, Anna. Just also to comment on some of the sharing some of my own experiences, and I would echo what René said, that typically in the Netherlands the statutory audit is completed after the group work. I know in some other territories that's not always the case, but in the Netherlands that would typically be the case. But contrary to what René said, well, my experience is much more that the interest is much more on the group audit work. That needs to be completed in time. That's where the pressure is on. And it is largely driven also by the emphasis that the company or the group has on the statutory accounts, because typically the statutory accounts are an afterthought. Nobody really cares about the statutory accounts, at least from a group point of view. So also local management sees it as a compliance exercise, and that also drives then the effort that goes into the statutory accounts. But that's not the issue that you're researching here. You're researching the work that is supporting the group auditor's review or the group auditor's opinion. And one of the questions that I had was, you speak about review and lack of review. And in my view, the review is doesn't necessarily only needs to be on the audit file, because there's a slew of communication back and forth, including reports, memorandum of examination or whatnot, which also would be part of the review. I don't think it's a necessity per se that the file needs to be opened up for this.
No, and thank you. I agree with you on that. It's not just the review of the file that's important. What again, it's, you know, we'd have to look further into the data, but it's much more what we found was that it was we were told to do this engagement, yeah, go do this component audit, and that was the kind of last thing we heard from them. We sent everything back, and I mean, even this may be an extreme, but that last quote that's up there at the moment. So the only time we ever heard from the group auditors was when we asked them to increase our fees, you know, and that was over several years. That was sort of the common type of, that wasn't a common comment, I'll say that, like that wasn't regular out there, but that was sort of the inflection that we were feeling from a lot of these quotes or these responses that we were getting. Yep. So we do have more of this, and it was a lot of along the lines of, they just don't think we're important. They just didn't do anything. And I think that, and this again, it goes right back to Jan's point of incentives that he asked at the start of this little part. The incentives is what's important about this. And we were looking at that and go, all right, maybe it's just the review file that these people are talking about, which you're mentioning, you know, it's more than that. But if it's the review file and the group auditor isn't looking at it, they're not even responding to it or saying, you know, even good work or everything's signed off or whatever that is, you know, like there's no response. There is a lack of incentive there for the component auditor. And what we did start looking at is into some of this like motivation. What's their motivation? Incentives would be another word to use for it. You know, if they're perceiving themselves as unimportant, what's the motivation or incentive to do a high quality job for the group auditor? I mean, the group auditor is the one that needs to sign off on this component. And as was mentioned before, there is that perspective of perhaps, you know, like there's reputational issue if you do a bad job, but the review, and I'd love to give you some more quotes. We don't have all of them up, like we have a lot more, but a lot more was like, there were quotes in there and the words were very along these lines of, I don't think they even looked at the review. Like I don't think they even looked at the file once.
Yeah, and it's clear that that's troublesome. Well, I think a lot has to do with how you are, and this all comes back a little bit to what Jan was talking about before, is, are you a team? And how do you communicate and work together as a team, and with what objective? Because if that's not clear, you get these type of comments. But no, it's very interesting so far, so please proceed.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. So we're at the review process. I mean, I'd love to, if everyone, I'll move through the last bit of the review process pretty quickly, because there's just a few comments of positive experiences versus negative experiences and timeliness. But then we'd like to get into just the last bit, and then obviously I might try to keep around 10 minutes for any more comments that we may have. So just continuing on there. Well, this is what we were just talking about, motivation and opportunities to learn, a lack of review. The opportunities to learn is, you know, if there's no feedback from the group auditor, we're not learning about what we need to do and what we should improve for the next period. So that was pretty important in the motivation there. And this actually answers what I was just talking about relatively our component is not significant in the group, things like that. So that was some of the comments that we received there about the review. Another negative experience was many delayed reviews. And what this caused was they found that the reviews that they did receive on those smaller minority, that less than 50% that did receive any type of review, it was extremely delayed. You know, the team members were off on different engagements. They were all split up around the places. Memory recall becomes difficult, try to remember the details. And so it just took a lot more time. So the efficiency of that process was hurt a little bit there. One more, some positive experiences. What was really positive was the two positive experiences. One, when the group auditor was involved throughout most of the phases of the engagement, they found that they were also involved in the review. So if they came out for the planning phase or was involved in the planning phase, they were communicative through the fieldwork. This was the group auditor that was also communicative and provided a higher level or decent review of the work at some stage. So that was a positive experience that they had there that reported from the component auditors. The second positive experience that was reported was a site visit. And this one's pretty interesting here. So when the group auditor at some stage visited, whether it was in the sign-off meeting, whether it was in the visited the component auditor, visited the client at the end, in the sign-off at the end of the engagement at some stage, that was viewed as very positive, and that's when they also received greater review comments or sign-offs that everything went well. So that was an interesting thing there. Now, I know not every group auditor can come out to all the components, but it was one aspect that we found was, appreciated a lot by the component auditors. So I'm at the end of the phases there. We are going to go do one more mentee meeting slide, and then come back. We have some additional findings that we'd like to talk about before we conclude and have some discussion. So I'm going to let Anna share. Anna, do I need to stop sharing? Is that?
So I think I just took over. Do you see my?
Oh, yes, I can see your screen. Yes.
Do you see the poll? Yeah. So indeed, thank you so much, Andrew, so far. I guess we would like to revisit our previous question where we asked you to indicate which phase you think is the most important when it comes to challenges, and kind of think about that again now that you've seen our findings, and now not pick one phase, but basically rank these 4 phases that we've talked about by how you perceive the issues found create the greatest challenge to the auditor. All right, I see some responses coming in. And just to be clear, it's not like we will give you the right answer after this. I mean, we really don't know ourselves, but it's interesting to see how people respond here. So I guess first place is quite clearly planning, second review that we just discussed, staffing third, and fieldwork fourth. A few more responses coming in, but seems like this is fairly stable. All right. Thank you.
Anna, I know you said we wouldn't give them the correct findings, but that's how I would have ranked them, so I'm going to say that they're correct.
Okay, let's do that.
Exactly that way. Planning, then review, and then maybe fieldwork over staffing, but we'll see. What I'd like to finish with, what we're going to do is look at 2 additional findings that we had. And these are both sort of cultural barriers. So we asked, after those 4 phases, these were we were very structured with the 4 phases of the fieldwork, the planning, the staffing, and the review. But after that, we asked about other experiences, and two that were quite common and consistent coming out of the data were cultural barriers. Okay, and so these cultural barriers, 2 of them were the differences in accounting and audit quality requirements between the Netherlands and the group audit countries. And so obviously in our sample, we had the Netherlands and we had the UK and Germany. And that came up as there were differences there, with Netherlands being a lot more stringent with the quality requirements. And as you can see here from from these slides that Anna's put up there, just between the cultures and requirements, you know, there was substance over form. German culture preferred that. Dutch audit requirements are much more detailed and stricter, and that came up very often. Similar with that third quote there. Necessary for increased audit effort from Dutch auditors, which isn't understood by the foreign auditors. So, which is an important point. The group auditor may not be understanding those differences. Now, we're talking about the Netherlands and the UK and Germany, close countries by not only physical distance, but pretty close among, you know, types of cultural aspects anyway. But extrapolating that to a problem that could be existed throughout the rest of the world type of thing, that is with major different cultural differences, that's something that could be possibly looked at further going forward. And again, you know, the last one there, the UK had a lower quality standard than the component team in the Netherlands. So a lot of that was not, what we found was not discussed up front, or was less understood up front. It wasn't like it was okay, they need to do this. It wasn't understood by the the group auditor that this needed to occur. The second major difference we found was differences in personality traits and interactions between the auditors and others such as the clients, management, and group auditor. And here are some of these comments, and it's the Dutch were, you know, we're interviewing the Dutch, surveying the Dutch people, and they were very like this. Well, we're a bit more abrupt and upfront than other cultures, and that caused a little bit of conflict is not the right word, but a little bit of concern from the group auditors. So, I mean, we have some of those quotes there. You know, the UK client was more, the UK group audit was more focused on client expectations. In the Netherlands, you're more direct to the client. And the UK colleagues, you know, being an Australian person very close to the UK, it's like could be a little bit, whoa, what are we doing? Are we upsetting them there? You know, and in the Netherlands, we are more frank in our discussion with management. So I thought they were very interesting comments, and they were very consistent across our group. And I know we have a question there. You're welcome to ask, Remke.
Thank you. I mean, this is very intriguing. When you were talking about the additional findings, I was stumbling in my brains upon the following. You separated the stages between staffing, planning, fieldwork, and review. And I was thinking, to what extent in your qualitative research came across the communication part, that in some global audits with components and group auditors, it might be that an issue identified at the component level, very small, but of very large impact to the group annual report and disclosures, must be communicated very fast to the group level, to the audit committee. And communication then is something which goes across all these stages. And it is not a sequential stage, but communication is a cornerstone in a quality audit. So I was thinking, to what where did that came out, or did you research it? Did you find it somewhere?
We did, in fact, and a lot of our more of our academic side of our paper was focused early on, and it will continue a little bit. That was the communication and coordination challenges. Yeah. So I think that was even our original title earlier on. I think we had that title. So there was communication and coordinated challenges, and then we found it was much more. Our paper was much more focused on the communication issues from the component audit, as in the group auditor did not communicate and down. But you're absolutely right that there is a very big need for the component auditor to communicate up to the group auditor. And what the other research, this is non-ours, this is from some of those that Anna presented a little bit earlier, they have a lot more of that perspective going, the component auditors aren't communicating to us. And so what I guess my overarching look at all of this is that the perspective is the component auditors are blaming the group auditors and the group auditors are blaming the component auditors. And somewhere we've got to meet in the middle to improve this overall, or whether that's from a regular, like a standard set of perspective requiring it, or whether that's a, meeting earlier on to demand the right audit fees, but having the communication channels open. I don't have the answers to that. I'd love to, but
yeah, that's intriguing, because you might find people are blaming each other, but on the other hand, it also takes perspective taking changes, because as a component auditor, you need to identify this might be a problem not in my component, but a huge problem for the group level, and vice versa. And as a group auditor, you need to open up your communication channels to absorb all this kind of information and identify it very fast. Here it goes wrong in large collapses or financial disasters or whatever, when you do not. Intriguing coordination and communication. That's a key part. Yeah, thank you.
And I think you're right too, and it falls back a little bit to our when the component auditors thinking there's a lack of involvement from the group auditor, and that we had those comments in there that they go, it seems like we're insignificant, and that came out in the review process and things like that. Well, then they're going to be much less likely to, if, on the following years, if they feel like they're insignificant, well, what's the real point? The group auditor treats us as insignificant. Do I really need to raise these major issues, like you said? So there's a run-on effect over time, I believe, which is, I think that's a major concern for firms.
And at least one lesson from your research is that if you treat your component auditors with decent reviews, they will get involved in the end in the quality of also the group audit. That's one key message I take from it.
I think even involvement from not just from the end. I think you're right for the involvement from the end, particularly that's for the following year, but involvement from the start and decent communication. It doesn't have to be direction or minor direction. It doesn't have to be you need to do this, this, and this. It's a collaborative effort and a back and forth, and then come up with a reasonable staffing solution, a reasonable budget, a good plan together where, that there was that finding of where, the group just sends out a component audit plan to 20 different groups, to 20 different components. That's not working either. So it's that collaborative environment through each of those 4 phases, I think, is where this will be improving things. But I don't know if people believe me.
Thank you.
No problem.
We do believe you, Andrew.
So, you believe me, Jan? Thank you. I appreciate
it. I do.
Maybe the powers to be in the standard setting boards and those, hopefully, well, I think they probably agree too, because they're the ones finding it. So hopefully there's something can come out of this study, and also those match of other studies that are out there that Anna discussed before.
The number of factors that you identify are quite large. It's overwhelming almost, right? So if you are thinking of improving this from the perspective, let's just take a perspective of the auditor, the group audit, the firm who organized the group auditor thinks that this should improve, right? It's very hard to actually make even a good start. So where should you start? Well, that is already a very important, difficult question to answer. But also from the perspective of the component auditor, right? If he or she wants to do a better job than now, how can they improve their procedure to do a better job? I mean, it's very, very complex. In my view, to solve. I mean,
Well, I think it is, and that may be a very good segue. You've done this about 4 times in this presentation. It might be a very good segue to our very next slide, which is, please give us one way to solve this problem, a problem.
Sorry.
We should have put you on the presentation.
Yeah, I was having the same thought. So yeah, well, Jan already told you this is very challenging, and it is, of course, but what do you think would be, where could we start, just in terms of giving some recommendation to the standard setters, but also the audit firms involved? What would be, in your view, the most important or the best key way in which some of the problems that we've been discussing in the last 1.5 hours could be solved? Better standard setting. Guess it's a difficult question, Andrew.
Yeah, well, like we said, we'd struggle to answer it too.
Oh, there we go. Better infrastructure, rotation across group auditor and component auditor. So I guess speaking to the team spirit that we talked about earlier, communication training, so making sure communication is working, stronger standards, especially ISO 600. Secondments, I guess that would also speak to that tacit knowledge transfer that Downey and Bedard talk about. Getting connected, planning, merge into one team. I'm trying to see which ones are new. 360 feedback. Accountability. So I guess that speaks to the incentive structure we talked about earlier. Wow, these are great suggestions, I think. Will help us write up our conclusion section, Andrew.
Definitely will. So, everyone, I mean, we're at the end of our presentation. We have a little conclusion slide, but part of the questions and discussion with Remco before, and then also with Jan, was effectively answered this. Our findings, what we have there is really corroborates what the regulators, not only IFIA, but also over in the US, the PCAB findings of these group audits, of these problems here. So timely involvement by the group auditor lacking understanding the component, and also the group auditor review of the component audit work. So we found that the component auditors are also experiencing what the regulators are stating. Now, again, we're focusing here from the component audit perspective. That's not the group auditors' complaints or difficulties or challenges with the component auditor. But we did notice many positive benefits when the component auditor gets involved. So once they're involved, there were increases to efficiency and effectiveness, audit quality, and even at some stage that component auditor comfort. Now, comfort's a very big perspective because it helps with incentives, it helps with motivation, and it helps, it's a pretty tough world for these auditors. So having that comfort there is important. So that greater group auditor involvement has lots of benefits there. And I guess our two major findings, well, I call them the major findings, but was that really could be fixed as a potentially is, one is this lack of review process or lack of involvement by the group auditor at the end, and that is having that effect of that on-running effect. And secondarily, the budgets, so consistently finding them that they're too low. And again, what does that do to the incentives and motivation of the component auditors, particularly when they're being asked to do it in busy season or vacation holiday season? So there's a lot of things going on there. But overall, it seems like two sides need to get together and match with that. So the component auditors need to match with the group auditors and I guess standard setters and regulators. So this is going to be a big group effort to start to improve this here, because component audits is such a large part of our audit world. So I'm finished there. Thank you. Right on 11. I guess that's perfect. Unless there were some questions, I apologize.
Thanks, Andrew. Great on the time management, which we were a bit worried about up front, but that worked out really well. Also, thank you all people in the audience for your contributions in the polls and in making this a really interesting discussion. And I think we learned a lot as well.
Great lot.
So yeah, I think that's all from our side. Thank you, Jan.
Yes, and I would like to thank you very much. Normally we would have drinks, so we have to store them for now. But we keep that in store. But thank you very much, and I also would like to thank the participants for their contribution and their questions and their listening. Actually, this is a very thorny issue almost. So. It's quite a lot to look into, and I'm really glad that you guided us into what are the issues that we should be looking at. We haven't solved them today, but we are on the way, right? So thank you very much. I all wish you all the best with the project, and as far as the whole group here is concerned, thank you for being here, and please make sure that you participate in the next class as well. It's you see that we have great presenters. So thank you and have a nice weekend.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.